Hello everyone, welcome to Sam's Summaries. This episode is a deep dive discussion into Sam Fury's summary of the book Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. It has been created with the help of AI. You can read the original summary at samfury.com.
All right, so think of this deep dive as us helping you unlock your inner storyteller.
Okay.
Like how to find those hidden stories, the ones that are just kind of sitting there in plain sight, and then figure out how to shape them and share them in a way that people really connect with.
I think what's really interesting about Dix's approach is that he doesn't just throw techniques at you. He really digs into the why of storytelling, and he kind of reminds us that we all have stories worth telling, even if we maybe don't think so at first.
Totally. That really resonated with me too.
Yeah.
Like he's giving us permission to embrace those everyday moments and find the extraordinary within them.
He even has this really interesting exercise he calls homework for life, where he encourages us to just think about our day and pinpoint the most meaningful moment. And it could be something big,
Sure.
but it could also be something super small, like finding a perfectly ripe avocado at the store.
It's like training your mind to be more present, to really see those details that we usually just kind of let slip by. But do you think that actually helps with storytelling, though?
I think it's more than just remembering. It's almost like shifting your perspective.
Okay.
So by consciously noting these moments, you're almost building this mental catalog of potential stories.
Right.
And then when you start framing those memories as narratives, they become more vivid, more impactful.
So it's not just about journaling, it's about thinking like a storyteller, even in just your daily life. That makes a lot of sense. But what about those times when we feel like we're drawing a blank? Like we just don't have anything interesting to say?
Well, Dix has a pretty unconventional solution for that: crash and burn writing.
Okay.
So imagine this, right?
Okay.
You sit down with a pen and paper or at your computer, and you just let your thoughts flow out onto the page like a runaway train.
Yeah.
No judgment, no editing, just pure expression.
It sounds a bit chaotic, like letting those ideas crash and burn on the page.
Well, that's the name, yeah.
Makes sense. But I can see how that might help overcome writer's block or something.
Yeah, it's about bypassing that inner critic that can stifle creativity. So by giving yourself permission to just write without any constraints, you might uncover hidden memories or make unexpected connections.
Okay, yeah.
That spark new story ideas.
So it's almost like digging for buried treasure in your own mind. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. So we're actively looking for these story gems using techniques like crash and burn and homework for life, but those are just fragments, right?
Yeah.
How do we actually start shaping these raw materials into a story that's really captivating?
Right. So that's where Dix introduces this really, really great concept he calls the 5 seconds.
Okay.
It's about finding the pivotal moment of transformation in your story.
Okay.
The point where everything shifts. The moment that kind of gives the story its meaning and power.
It's like finding the heart of the story.
Yes.
That turning point that makes everything else click into place. But wouldn't any moment of change work?
Well, not exactly. It's not just any change. It's the moment that reveals the essence of the story that you're trying to tell.
Okay.
And Dix actually gives a great example in the book about a story called Charity Thief.
Right.
Where he really illustrates this concept beautifully.
Okay, so finding those 5 seconds is key.
Yeah.
But how do we know we've found the right ones? And once we do, how do we build the rest of the story around them?
Well, Dix argues that everything in your story should lead to and amplify this core moment. So it's about creating a structure that keeps the audience engaged, building that tension, and ultimately delivering an emotional payoff.
So it sounds like we're talking about more than just remembering what happened.
Yeah.
It's about crafting a narrative that really resonates with the listener.
Right.
And that brings us to another point that Dix makes that's really interesting. Sometimes a little creative license can actually make the truth better.
Oh, you're talking about what Dix calls permissible lies. It's kind of a provocative term, but it's not about making stuff up.
So we're not actually lying to our audience.
No, definitely not.
Okay, good.
It's more about strategically omitting or maybe rearranging some details to make the story flow better and have a bigger impact.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between staying true to what happened, but also shaping it in a way that people will actually want to listen to. But isn't that kind of dangerous?
Well, Dix argues that focusing on smaller, more relatable details, even within big events, can make stories more powerful and universal.
Okay.
Because it's not about dazzling your audience with crazy adventures or larger-than-life tales.
Right.
It's about finding those human moments, the relatable details that everyone can connect with.
I'm starting to see how those seemingly small details can actually make a big difference in how people react to our stories. But I'm also kind of curious, how do you make sure you don't lose the truth of the story when you're playing around with the structure and the details?
That's a great question. And it's something that Dix addresses directly. He gives really clear guidelines and examples to make sure that while you're shaping your story, you're not distorting the truth in a way that makes it less authentic or hurts your credibility as a storyteller.
So it's about being careful and intentional. Even when we're taking those permissible liberties, this is really making me rethink how I approach storytelling. We've talked about finding those hidden gems, shaping them, even spicing them up a bit.
Right.
But I think what's really hitting home for me is this idea that everyone has a story worth telling.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's something that Dix emphasizes throughout the book. You don't have to be famous or have an extraordinary life to be a good storyteller.
Right.
It's about finding those moments, big or small, that have shaped you, and then sharing them in a way that feels real.
It's like he's giving us permission to embrace our own experiences, even the ones that seem ordinary, and find something extraordinary within them. It's really empowering, isn't it?
It is. And that's where some of Dix's other techniques come in. They help us not just find our stories, but also craft them and deliver them in a way that really connects. But before we jump into that, I'm curious, what's standing out to you so far?
Honestly, what's really standing out to me is how much Dix talks about being vulnerable. He's saying it's okay to be human, to show your flaws.
Our flaws, our struggles, those are the things that actually make us relatable.
Right.
Help us connect with the audience.
He even talks about the two ways of telling a hero story, right?
Yeah.
One where you focus on all the achievements and stuff,
Right.
and one where you actually lean into those moments of vulnerability. So I'm guessing he's not saying we should just brag about how awesome we are.
He suggests that audiences connect way more deeply with stories that show our humanity, our struggles, our doubts. It's about letting go of that need to be perfect and just allowing ourselves to be seen, warts and all.
It's like those moments in movies where you have the hero and they seem invincible, but then they stumble, they show some weakness. That's when you really start to root for them.
It's that vulnerability that makes us human. It allows people to see themselves in our stories. And Dix argues that this is true, not just for formal storytelling, but even for just everyday conversations.
So whether we're on stage or just chatting with a friend, that willingness to be open can actually make those connections stronger.
Absolutely.
It almost seems counterintuitive, though.
It might seem that way, but it's incredibly powerful. And speaking of powerful storytelling techniques, Dix has this one that might surprise you. He's a big fan of using the present tense.
That's kind of unusual. I feel like most stories I've heard are told in the past tense. Wouldn't that make it harder to give context or background?
It might seem a little unconventional, but Dix says that using the present tense creates this sense of immediacy.
Okay.
Like you're right there in the moment with the storyteller. So instead of saying, I went to the store, you'd say, I'm walking into the store, the fluorescent lights are buzzing, and I can't believe who I see.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. That does paint a much more vivid picture.
Right.
It's like you're pulling the listener right into the scene.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be harder to jump around in time?
Yeah.
Or explain stuff that happened before?
It's definitely a technique that you got to use carefully.
Right.
It might not work for every story, but when it's done well, it can really, really elevate a narrative, make it way more engaging and emotionally resonant.
So it's about choosing the right tool for the job, knowing when the present tense can really make a difference. Are there other ways to make our stories come alive for the listener?
Oh, absolutely. Dix is all about those little specific details that draw you in. He calls them milk cans and baseballs, babies and blender, those little everyday objects that add a bit of humor and texture.
It's not about trying to impress people with big words or epic adventures.
Right.
It's about finding those small, relatable things that make the story feel real.
Right.
But how do we know which details to include and which ones to leave out?
He goes back to that idea of the 5 seconds.
Okay.
Every detail you choose should help highlight and amplify that key moment in your story.
Right.
It's like you're a sculptor, right?
Right.
And your story is the clay. You're shaping it, refining it, bringing out the important parts, and smoothing away anything that's distracting.
So it's about being selective, choosing the details that matter. But isn't there a risk of overdoing it?
Yeah.
Like losing the natural flow of the story?
That's where Dix's advice on what he calls storytelling as time travel comes in. He warns about common pitfalls, like asking the audience questions directly or even using the word story. He says those kinds of things can break the spell.
Yeah.
Pull the listener out of the experience.
It's like when you're watching a movie and a character suddenly turns to the camera and winks. It takes you right out of it.
Yeah. Dix really emphasizes the importance of staying immersed in the world of the story, letting the listener get swept away. And he also reminds us that even experienced storytellers get nervous.
Oh, thank goodness. I thought it was just me.
No, it's totally normal.
So it's okay to feel those butterflies before sharing our stories.
Absolutely. It's part of what makes storytelling so powerful. It shows that we care.
Yeah.
And Dix actually encourages us to use that nervous energy to fuel our performance. He even calls storytellers superheroes for having the courage to share their experiences.
That's a really cool way to think about it. It's not about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to step up and share our stories, even if we're a little scared.
That's the beauty of storytelling. It's about connection. It's about vulnerability. It's about the shared human experience. And while Dix gives us a ton of techniques and tips, ultimately, he encourages us to find our own voice, to tell the stories that only we can tell.
Yeah, it's like he's saying that even our little stories, the ones that seem kind of ordinary, they can still have a big impact on people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what makes Storyworthy so great. It's not just a how-to book. It's more like an invitation.
Yeah.
It's like he's inviting us to discover the power of storytelling, not just for fun, but as a way to learn about ourselves and connect with others.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
Remembering how to find those hidden story gems with crash and burn writing and homework for life, and then how to build those stories around that 5 seconds moment.
Right. And we talked about how important vulnerability is and that thing about the present tense, how powerful that can be.
And how sometimes those permissible lies can actually make our stories feel more true, which is kind of wild.
It is, yeah.
And all those tiny details, like Dick says, the milk cans and baseballs, babies and blenders.
Yeah, all that stuff can really make a difference.
Definitely. But honestly, I think the biggest takeaway from Storyworthy is that every single one of us has a story worth telling.
Absolutely.
It's about finding those moments, the ones that have made us who we are, and sharing them in a real and honest way.
Yeah, I think that's the heart of it. And as you keep exploring the world of storytelling, I want to leave you with a question that Dix asks at the end of his book.
Okay.
He asks, why did you read this book? What do you hope to do with the power of storytelling?
It's a good question.
Maybe you want to inspire people or share your experiences or connect with others on a deeper level. Or maybe you just want to make them laugh. Whatever it is, remember that your voice matters and your story has the potential to make a real difference.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Storyworthy, just remember this. You are a storyteller.
You are.
Don't be afraid to embrace that, to share your story with the world.
Right.
Who knows? It might be exactly what someone needs to hear today.
Thanks for tuning in to Sam's Summaries. If you found this episode useful, let us know with a like, follow, and share. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to visit samfury.com to get free access to all of Sam's original summaries. You can also get any of Sam's books and other exclusive content. It's all completely free at samfury.com.